An honor to be here tonight. I can't tell you how excited I am. You know, to have the opportunity to stand before you and share about the miracle of recovery in this program for me is truly a deep, deep honor. And so I left my house a few minutes ago. Where's the tissue? I'm already starting. I left my house a few minutes ago, and I have a 19-year-old son. I have a 19-year-old son who has a girlfriend. He has a girlfriend, a car, a job, and all that kind of stuff. But the mother that I have been to this young man has been phenomenal as a result of this program. And as I sat there and I have my notes, and he's walking out the door, and I want to say to him, I don't know when I'm going to tell him I'm in this program, you guys. I don't know how you have that conversation. So he doesn't know yet, but at some point I will tell him. But tonight, thank you so much. Tonight, I just watched him leave, and I just wanted to say, you know, the miracle of our lives and the miracle of our relationship is truly Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. I'm not sure he would ever see that one coming. But that is a lot of what I'm grateful for, is that I have the opportunity to do a lot of things differently today as a result of being in this program. And so I'm going to share a few of those with you. My hands are shaking. I guess I'm really nervous. This time yesterday, I was in the middle of a meltdown. And it was a good meltdown, you know. Does everybody, you guys know good meltdowns, right? You know, good meltdowns, there's the healing pain and there's the hurting pain. The healing pain that moves us deeper into recovery, and the hurting pain, the stuff that we do that takes us back. And so, you know, just being able to look at the scope of my life and the scope of the insanity of that to prepare to be here is really overwhelming. You know, the people who have gone before me, Michelle, and was it Tom who was here last month? I mean, I just have tremendous respect for that. They seem to just handle it so calm, cool, and collected, and I'm not quite feeling there, and that's just okay. I'm totally okay with that. I hope you're okay if I start crying, maybe even sobbing. But it's really good stuff. You know, it's really the joy of recovery. It's the honor of getting to cry together. You know, when newcomers come in and they cry, so often they say, "Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm crying." And we're like, "No, cry!" You know, like, bring it on. Because we know that that's really healing. And so, you know, I'm a world-class, full-blown, flaming sex and love addict. And of all the clubs that I thought I was ever going to be a part of, this one is not it. You know, the people who knew me would not have said, "Oh yes, that Alicia Ashley, she's going to be in that Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous group someday." That's not what they would have said to me. I was voted most likely to succeed at my high school, you know. That was way off too, but that wasn't really what was going to come down. But I got here because I had a big, gaping hole in my soul. And that big, gaping hole was encompassed by feeling unworthy, feeling less than, you know, feeling like I was the dirt on the floor, feeling like I didn't matter, like I was insignificant and unimportant to the people that I should have been the most significant and the most important to. And so was it a beautiful day when I came waltzing into SLAA? No, it wasn't a beautiful day. It was March 20th, 2012. So I'm so grateful that by the grace of God and the miracle of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous that I do have 6 years, 3 months, 10 days, and about 45 minutes of sobriety. Yes, you can applaud that. Yeah, that's 6 years have been jam-packed with amazing miracles and really, really hard times. And so that was a pivotal day because I'd just spent 3 days with a dude I met on eHarmony in San Francisco crying most of the time. Not a pretty picture. And 3 days because, my whole world was about, connecting, and that, I thought I was this person who just loved the intimacy and all this kind of stuff. But it was that I needed something that also does me in. I needed I call it lava, the lava from another person. And that stands for love, attention, validation, and acceptance. Like that lava that I seek. And, like the vampire is seeking in other people. Like I needed that lava to make me feel whole. And so, I met this guy on eHarmony, and he came down right away within like 2 weeks, and we'd already talked about the really important things in a relationship. We talked about money. We talked about him moving down here from Calgary, and we talked about pledging our love to each other. Just say, oh no. Just give me a really big, oh no. Like this is an oh no moment. He hadn't met me, and he was telling me he loved me, and he was pledging his love to me, and that he had told everybody that he worked with in Calgary, And so anyway, before he left that weekend that he came down, I wasn't that attracted to him, and he'd sent me these long, drawn-out emails, and we'd have these long conversations on the phone, and even me, a world-class love addict, needed to say, hey, dude, I can't respond to all this. I was spending hours and hours between reading them and talking to him. Like, I gotta figure out how to have a life, and I have a child. And so anyway, he got off the plane that first visit. Remember, I just connected with him 2 weeks prior. And I wasn't that attracted to him. Like, oh no, he doesn't really look like his pictures. What are we going to do here? But we make it work, right? We make it work. We make it work. He'd pledged his love to me. His bonus was 7 figures. And he was going to move here as soon as I wanted him to move here. And so we went to Santa Monica and saw the Cirque du Soleil, and everything was grand. And he bought me a $3,000 diamond promise ring, and I took pictures and sent it to all my friends. And my friends were at this point rolling their eyes because my friends had had enough of my roller coaster romances. Like, yeah, we know what's going to happen. They saw it all. And they would say things to me like, just go slow, Alicia. Just go slow. Now, I know this isn't the room for me to ask, do any of you guys know how to go slow? But I don't know how to go slow. Go slow. You might as well be talking in like Greek to me. And so anyway, he went back to Calgary. Those were the highlights of that trip. And 3 weeks later was his birthday. And so we went to San Francisco. And immediately off the plane, something was very wrong. He was cold. He was distant. He was unattentive and unaffectionate. And I was suicidal. If he's going to be that, and that, then I'm not getting any of my fix. You see, I'm an addict, just like those in AA, NA, all of that A. The only difference is my fix has legs. Thank you for that little laugh, Yoli. My drug, is a man. And so I wasn't getting my fix from him. And it was a horrible 4 days, or 3 or 4 days. I forget what it was. And at the end of that time, when he took me to the airport that morning on March 19th, dropped me off really early, and he was headed to Calgary, and I was headed back to Orange County, gave me an icy hug, and I went to my gate, and just a wreck No validation or no lava, no love, approval, validation, or acceptance, none of that. It was like bone dry. I mean, we had sex, but like, what's that? It's like if there's no love, approval, validation, or attention, it just didn't work for me. And so I just remember feeling utter despair, total emptiness. And I was standing in line to get an egg sandwich, holding back tears for everything I could do is holding back tears. And there was a janitor who came over, and he was changing the trash can liner in the trash can. And he looked at me and he says, "You look so beautiful today." And I am here to tell you, I just felt it from head to toe that I needed the love, the approval, the validation, and the acceptance, even if it was from this janitor. And I took note of that, like, whoa, like there was something that clicked, like how odd all of this was. And I got my egg sandwich and I sat back down, and Mr. Calgary's calling. And I'm like, hell no, not just no, but hell no, I'm not taking that call, because he was so good on the phone. Like, he was a different person. Like, he came to life. He had energy and passion and creativity and flair. And in person, he was dull and boring. And so, anyway, I got back to Orange County, and I went to my first SLAA meeting the next night. And I'm so grateful to say that I've been sober ever since. And when I finally had the opportunity to talk to Mr. Calgary, he said, what you wrote in your eHarmony profile was true. You have a big heart full of love to give to somebody, but you are just too intense for me. You are just too intense for me. And at that time, I had no idea what that meant. In our program, we're intense. We pursue sex and love with a vengeance. We don't show up half-assed for love and attention and validation. We are so in. And so how did I end up being a sex and love addict? I was really raised to be a sex and love addict. The way that my family was is that you couldn't say this plus this equals anything but sex and love addiction. My first drug of choice, though, is also food, better known as chocolate. So, that's in there a little bit, too. But in the end, my mom was or is a rageaholic, a narcissist, and a bully, and just all around painful woman to be in her presence with. Like, if she was on her best behavior, you could find something enjoyable. But living in the same household with her, there was not a redeeming quality that I could say, this is what I really connected with my mom on. My dad, on the other hand, was the kindest, sweetest, most caring man on the planet. And his only fault, as far as I could tell, was number one, marrying my mom. And number two, he never protected me from her. He never was able to have the backbone to stand up and protect me. And she would just as soon slap me across the face for no good reason as say good morning. She was that kind of woman. And so when I was really young, she would beat me and hold my head under a pillow if I was crying, and cuss at me and say very degrading things because I was crying. So here I'm being beaten with either a leather belt or her hand, and my head is under a pillow, and I think I'm dying, and I'm screaming, and at the same time trying not to do this, because knowing that makes the spankings and the beatings even worse. And another form of her punishment that she enjoyed was having me stand in the corner And the stand in the corner was like a Russian roulette game, because you're standing there and there's not a sound around, and then suddenly out of nowhere she's beating me. And so, what I know today about the narcissistic personality is that they do take great pains to be confusing and to be withholding of love and validation and approval. And so I had 2 older brothers who were 10 and 11 years older than I am. And they were allowed to treat me like a piece of shit. They were allowed to call me their slave, like literally say, "Slave, will you go get me a Dr. Pepper?" And that was how my parents were teaching my brothers to view me. And my mother had told me that she had been sexually abused by her father. And so you would think that she would do everything within her power to make sure that I wasn't. But she didn't. And so they set it up when we moved from the farm. I was born in Luther, Oklahoma. Population 238. and we moved from Luther, Oklahoma into Oklahoma City, into a 3-bedroom home. And each of my brothers had their bedrooms, and my parents had their bedrooms, and I was told to sleep with my brothers. And I was molested by both brothers. And, when I told my parents that I didn't want to sleep with either of my brothers, they said, "Well, just sleep with us." And they were sexually active while I was in bed with them. So no place was safe in this home. There was no place that was safe. There was nowhere that I felt loved. No one was making me feel like I was special, I was important, I was cared for, I was loved. I felt like the dirt on the floor. The dogs would come in, and my mom would have just been angry at me, but she'd say, "Oh, come over here, sweet Cherie, you want me to give you some food?" And then she would yell at me. And similar to my brothers, she wasn't particularly nice to them, but she really targeted me for the abuse. And so when I say I came here with this gaping wound, it really was true. So I got very lucky in that I was a full-blown compulsive eater. Compulsive eating, food is legal. It's easy to get. My mom was a compulsive eater too. She'd come home and she'd fix, the desserts before she'd fix dinner. And so I just began to really numb my feelings. If you think about the Thanksgiving effect, how you feel on Thanksgiving when you're so full, you can't look at the pain. Like I didn't look at the emotional pain when I was so full. But when I was 19, I realized that I needed help. And I heard on the radio a public service announcement for Overeaters Anonymous. And what they said was, if you can't quit feeding your face and you can't quit pigging out, call Overeaters Anonymous. And I'm like, that's me! And I went to my first meeting that night. And I got a Nazi sponsor in OA. And I say Nazi sponsor, there weren't many sponsors that were available. I was 19 years old, and she had a Nazi sponsor who was an AA priest. He was a circuit speaker in AA, Father Larry Kowalski, but he also worked an OA program. And she told me to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. And to sit in these meetings and hear people like caring about each other, like talking about feelings and stuff that never happened in my house, and not being put down for having those feelings. I was put down for crying and for shedding a tear. And so, that was a really, really valuable journey. And I heard, "We'll love you until you learn to love yourself." And it really was true. There were groups of AA women's meetings that took me under their wing. And I remember one woman telling me, "If we told you how awful you were, you would say, yeah. But if we tell you how amazing and beautiful and loving and caring and kind you are, you wouldn't be able to take it." Well, by the time she got to the end of the sentence, I was already sobbing, because my soul didn't have the receptor to even hear a positive comment. I was so empty. So That was also a big year because I saw Elvis Presley. He came to Oklahoma City. I know, I got to throw that in there. He came to Oklahoma City, and I was one of those, and I got almost right up to Elvis Presley when the girl beside me elbowed me, and she got the sweaty handkerchief, and I didn't. But that very next week, I was performing on the same stage that Elvis was. I was a part of an American Indian dance troupe. I'm a quarter Sac and Fox Indian. And yes, my tribe has a casino, and I do get money. Not very much, though. But I was a part of this American Indian dance troupe. And boy, I was getting a lot of attention. And I was feeling the beginnings of sex and love addiction, what we know it to be. And, they were pouring Purple Passions, which was Everclear and grape juice. And, I'm just snacking on my Reese's peanut butter cup over here. But anyway, I was seeing all of this come down very early. And I've been married 2 times. And the first man was 20 years my senior, and really great person and good all around. But I had to divorce him because we were not having enough sex. And makes sense to all of you, right? And then I met a man who was the exact opposite in every single way. And I married him because we were having lots of sex, which is a good reason to get married, right? These are really great logical ways of thinking. And, I'm here to tell you, if I had only known then, it was the War of the Roses on steroids. We were just horrible together. We brought out the worst in each other. I had absolutely no sense because I was so sex addicted to him. I put my fists through 3 walls because of him. 3. One of them was 2 nights before we got married. And so it was coming to an end. And it was right about the time, if you remember, the comedian Phil Hartman, the Saturday Night Live comedian Phil Hartman. And so I remember being just having that, I love you, I need you, I hate your guts. I just remember being in that relationship, like, I gotta have you, go away, I never want to see you again, let's just have sex. And that was right about the time that Phil Hartman's wife killed him, and then she killed herself. And I remember thinking, that could be me. Like, when we think that this disease is just an issue of romance and fantasy or masturbation, and what good would an AA meeting be if we didn't throw out the masturbating word, I prefer to say menage me trois. Sex with me, myself, and I. That's a new one. We don't talk about menage me trois. Anyway, I knew that could be me. I knew that, I didn't have any firearms. I don't have a thing for knives. But the internal part of what happened, I related to, and that scared me. And we went to therapist after therapist after therapist. And I remember sitting in those therapists' office thinking, this is not going to do any good, because even if we divorce, we're still going to be having sex. What's the point? And I went to my first SLAA meeting. This was almost 20 years ago. And I'm really sad to announce that I thought you guys were really sick. And I wasn't that sick. Really, I just needed a lot more damage to my life. I needed a lot more pain and despair. And it was a co-ed meeting, and, I did feel uncomfortable. No offense to the gentleman in the room, but my newcomer brain needs to identify Like, that's not me, that's not me, that's not me. I'm out of here. And so it is so important, I feel, for me to be able to identify with other women. Like when they do this, this, and this, like that's you're singing my song, you're singing my story, saying my story. And so all I could do was get the book Facing Love Addiction. And Facing Love Addiction, the first chapter, where she talks about the love addict and the love avoidant, that they're facing each other. And then we all think we like so much intimacy, but we really can't handle the intimacy. And that one or the other turns. So let's say this is the love addict. The love addict turns, and the love avoidant goes, oh no, don't leave, don't leave. And then the love addict turns back around. And then the intimacy gets too much, and then the love avoidant turns. And the love addict's like, no, 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 don't leave me. And that's exactly what my marriage was. And I saw it in print. And it was unbelievable to me. It was unbelievable. And so that did help me get out of the marriage. But I still had roller coaster romances, disaster after disaster before Mr. Calgary. So my second husband, who is the father of my son, I call him my flagship qualifier, my Mac Daddy qualifier, because it was really, really bad. And, I am really, really grateful to say that once I got to that point, I never did have sex with him again. I never did go back to him. And that is a miracle, because sex addiction is really serious. And then the one that got me in the program, my butt in the seat qualifier, my butt in the room was Mr. Calgary. And so, to walk in that Wednesday night meeting, and I know Rachel was there, and Andy, and Michelle, you were in other meetings at that time, and Kim's not here tonight, but there were just a few women who were here then, who are still here now. And I am 100% certain that I've sponsored at least 50 women. And they're gone, And that's really sad to me, because if you ever take step one in our program, one thing's for certain: your sex and love is messed up from here on out. If you ever take step one in our program, you don't just get to go back out there and think that life is grand now, because it never becomes grand, if you have a sex and love addiction. And so the only way that it helped me, that I had been in OA for, at that time now 33 years and worked a solid program, was that I had the faith that the program worked. None of the other credits applied. Nothing else crossed over. There was nothing. I knew I was still empty inside. So what if I had abstinence? I didn't have sobriety in this program. But can you guys change the word sobriety? Because it just doesn't really work for me. I want something else, I was trying to think of all the ways that we should change the program, because sobriety, I'm not an alcoholic. Why are we calling it that? But anyway, I just went with the program because I was desperate. And I remember thinking, I've got a higher power. I believe in God. I know all about that. I know it's a spiritual solution. So what's up? And to take step one, there were times where I didn't think that I was a bona fide sex addict. And all I had to do was think about that marriage, and it's like, yes, I was definitely a bona fide sex addict. And the love addict was just raging all the time. But God, I didn't really get. Why did I have a great higher power. But it wasn't something that I ever knew I needed to surrender. Like, it didn't dawn on me that this is a serious problem to the degree that I need to surrender this to God. That third step prayer, that I love so much. God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. It never dawned on me to say that about my horrible marriage. It never dawned on me to say that about Mr. Calgary. And so I began to do that. I began to look at that gaping wound in me, that wound that was so painful to really look at, and apply the steps to all of that. And believed that that higher power had restored me to sanity in relationship with my food. And so I knew that that higher power could restore me to sanity with my sex and love addiction. If I would just surrender. Well, surrender is not my strong suit, you know. Surrender, it was like, hold on, because I know what I want and I know what I need. And you guys were talking about things like qualifiers and enmeshment. When I sat in our Saturday morning women's meeting, and at one point we were reading the all the brochures, and I read the Romantic Obsession brochure. If you haven't read this, this is a must. I remember going through here, and suddenly I was thinking, I thought this was my strong suit. I thought this was all the good stuff that made me such a great date. I thought this is what made me hot. I could not believe what was in print in this brochure. Like, they have got to be wrong. But I did, I got it. I understood enmeshment. That for me, the closer and the more enmeshed, and however many times we would talk every day, you know, if we'd talk 4 or 5 times a day, that was even better. You know, if we'd see each other, 5 or 6 days a week or more, that was even better. And, I know that now to be, said that we don't have relationships, we take hostages. But in all honesty, nobody was ever fighting, were they? And that whole, we don't have relationships, we take hostages. No, nobody was acting like they were a hostage. They went willingly along. So enmeshment, sobriety, qualifiers, intriguing. That was a word, like intriguing. All it is flirting. It's like a different level of, that kind of flirting. And then bottom lines. Like, what on earth are bottom lines? And so, I quickly set those bottom lines, and some of them were premature because they had to do with relationships. And, I was dedicated to not dating until I'd at least finished that 5th step, and preferably even longer. And so those bottom lines are kind of like, you look at what makes you insane around your sex and love addiction, and your bottom line is the opposite of that. And so it was kind of a funny thing, because we have another brochure that's 40 questions to determine if you're a sex and love addict. And out of 40 questions, I only said yes to 8. Well, I don't need this program, do I? But of those 8, I said big, on a Richter scale of 10, to 5 of those. And it was those 5 that really centered first around the love addiction. Because in my love addiction, I was an extraordinary wedding planner. I think some of you are wedding planners too. I fell in love with a different guy every day, the guy who pulled up at the stoplight next to me and turned and smiled. We're going to be in a relationship. The guy that came to the, post office and said, is this line moving very fast? And the guy at but the worst was the Trader Joe's guy. If he only knew I was telling his story all across the country. He walked in and I'm like, he is it. He is my kind of guy. He is so cute. And he smiled at me. And then we happened to be over on the cereal aisle at the same time. And, you know, he kind of spoke to me a little bit on the cereal aisle, and it's like, he's going to ask for my number over at the produce aisle. I know by the time we get to produce, because I'm a vegetarian, so that would only be right, that he would ask for my number in front of the produce aisle. Got to the produce aisle, and, you know, he said a few words, but he didn't. And my story, you know, ends with me crying in the parking lot. Because when he walked out past the cash register and just turned and smiled again, it was like he had daggers. It's like, you know, you're not asking for my phone number. And he just waved to me. But I was so needy and so cavernous in looking for love, attention, validation, and approval that I didn't get it. So I had to look at bottom lines. And so bottom lines were, I can't fall hook, line, and sinker. You know, I can't turn every person that's a male who smiles at me into my next husband. I'm so silly now. But it was real. It was real. And I can't, so my bottom lines really began around that. Like, I need to learn how to love myself the way I want somebody else to love me. I need to learn how to love myself the way I wanted my mother to love me. And I began to practice affirmations. And I think affirmations are a sacred practice. Affirmations help us to believe something that is true, that is actually true about us, but we don't come close to believing it yet. Like, I didn't remotely think I was lovable. So for me to walk around and saying I'm lovable was unbelievable. But it worked, you know, like I really began doing that. And set the bottom lines, set the top lines. You know, the top lines are, if I'm not out having fun in life and enjoying life and taking good care of myself and nurturing and self-care, then I'm going to be turning to somebody else to always do that for me. Like, I have to take care of myself. Like, if I'm not doing that, nobody else will. And the withdrawal just seemed to go on and on and on. Withdrawal is one of the nastiest things. It is emotional surgery without anesthesia. It's brutal. It's really brutal. I cried after Mr. Calgary for 30 solid days. And I did something really weird, but it worked. And I will suggest it. You take a baggie, and every time you blow your nose on a Kleenex, and every time you wipe your tears, you put them in a baggie. And I saved these tissues in this baggie because it was going to be a testimony that I was never going to do this again. It's like, these tissues in this baggie are the last tears I'm going to cry for that reason. You know, and I think I saved that baggie for a year, but I don't have it anymore. And so in recovery and in withdrawal, what happens is an enormous state of boredom. Like, boredom sets in because we're not getting our fix. You know, I wasn't getting my fix. I wasn't having those highs and lows. And so what had to happen is that, you know, I was always jacked up on something, you know, someone. And so I had to learn how to just take life as a normal process, like not jacked up on chemistry or sex addiction or something like that, and to learn how to be able to handle that. And I have to skip to step 10 and 11 because meditation is one of the things that helped me the most early on, is that I was having triggers, you know, and triggers, I think, are a sacred opportunity to learn more about yourself and to grow through them. And the biggest triggers for me were anytime someone made me feel insignificant, unimportant, or disrespected. The roof would blow off my head. You know, it would just be utter insanity, and I didn't get it. It took me some time to realize they're triggering all those feelings that I had being raised in that home that was so unsafe that nobody cared about me. And I had to begin to nurture that. And meditation was a fabulous strategy that really helped me to do that. I use 2 apps. One is called Calm and the other is called Headspace. And I think they're so important because I think if we're not doing an official kind of meditation practice, that we're cheating ourselves out of the serenity and joy that we can get in the program. But there's tons of stuff out there. And so I learned how to practice something called emotional generosity. You know, I came home from a home where it was emotional stingy. It was emotional bullshit, you know, emotional vacancy. And so just like I was setting bottom lines, you know, I had to set these other top lines, like what's my future going to be like? If I'm going to have a healthy relationship someday, and I think we have the best opportunity to have healthier relationships than other people, because when we learn this stuff and we own our stuff, you know, we can become really great in relationship. But emotional generosity wasn't something that I was taught. And so in raising my child, I have the opportunity to show him what emotional generosity looks like, you know, to deliver to him the acknowledgments and the kindness that he deserves. So the really best news that I want to share with you. Oh, I got to tell the lion in the cage story. How much time do I have, Rachel?
5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So what I discovered was that sex and love addiction is like taking a lion and throwing the lion in the cage and locking the cage and then taking the key and putting it in your pocket. And that's how we manage sobriety. Like our sex and love addiction, this isn't the funny part, Yoli. I'm just kidding you. The lion is in the cage and it's locked. The key's in my pocket. But I'm going to go on a date on Friday night, or, you know, I'm going to start sober dating. And you take the key and you open the cage and you take the tiger out and you play with the tiger and you don't have any addictive behavior and you don't make this person your higher power, and you know, you don't end up breaking all your bottom lines and having to tell your sponsor. Not a good day. And again, that's life. You just keep unlocking the cage, and we can't, just like alcohol, throw the lion in the cage and just forget about it. You know, it's like trying to teach an alcoholic how to have, a glass of wine a couple of times a day. And that just wouldn't work very well. So the super cool news that I have to share with you is that in homes where abuse is present, the most common thing is that abuse gets passed down from generation to generation to generation. And I am here to tell you that I have never abused my son, and that we have broken the chain of abuse. Thank you. That we have broken the chain of abuse. Like, this is big. I never have slapped my son across the face. I never held his head under a pillow or anything, anywhere remotely in that vicinity. So I am just so excited. And no one protected me. You know, my mother was a raging, you name it, she was it. And no one protected me. And there came a day when my son got in my car. He was 8 years old, and he was scared shitless of his dad. Dad hit me. I'm scared. No, I can't go see Dad tonight. No, I don't want to see Dad. And I had no idea what happened. And I tried to reason with his father, and there was no reasoning. And I had to file a restraining order. I got to stand up and protect my son. Thank you. I got to take a stand for him. And that was a really powerful day for me. If anybody had known about Child Protective Services, in Oklahoma at that time, I'm sure somebody would have called. But that didn't happen. And I've had 4 sober dating relationships. Come on, give me It's like a little kid with their training wheels on. But that's huge, because I got here because of a breakup. So I'm not in a relationship now. That means I've gone through 4 sober breakups. Yeah. And breakups are also one of the number one causes of suicide. So I want you to know that there is so much hope in this room and in our rooms. And that if tonight is your first meeting and you relate to anything that I've said, I hope you'll stay after. We were going to do Q&A, but we're going to have to do Q&A after, kind of over to the side. I'm happy to answer any questions and share anything about my experience, strength, and hope. And that I hope you'll really keep coming back and that you won't stop short of the miracle. Thank you.